Jane was a young and beautiful girl. Her beauty shone like the morning sun, and wherever she went, people could not help but admire her. Men in her village always watched in awe as she passed by, wishing they could have her as a wife, or at least as a friend. But Jane had a dream. She wanted to marry a rich man, someone who could take her out of poverty and give her a good life. Because of this, she never paid attention to the men admiring her, knowing they had nothing to offer her. Jane had a difficult life. She was an orphan, living alone in her late parents' old house. She had no siblings, no family to help her, and no wealth to make life easy. To survive, she worked on people's farms, doing all kinds of hard labor just to earn a little money. The villagers often called her to help with their farm work, and Jane did it gladly. No matter how small the payment, she accepted it with joy, believing that one day, her life would change for the better. She worked hard, prayed every day, and hoped for a brighter future. Despite her struggles, Jane remained kind and cheerful. She had a best friend named Shelly. The two girls were always seen together, talking, laughing, and sharing secrets. Jane trusted Shelly with all her heart, telling her everything, her dreams, her worries, and her hopes for the future. Whenever Jane was troubled, she would run to Shelly for advice. But Shelly was not as good a friend as Jane thought. Deep inside, she was jealous of Jane's beauty and the attention she received from men. She envied Jane's cheerful spirit and the way people admired her, even though she was poor. Sometimes, Shelly gave Jane bad advice, trying to lead her astray. But Jane, being wise, always used her common sense to do what was right. She never suspected that Shelly secretly wished for her downfall. Still, Jane continued to love and trust Shelly, unaware of the jealousy hidden in her friend's heart. She believed they were true friends who would always support each other. One bright afternoon, as Jane was returning from the market, she met a man she had never seen before. He was tall, handsome, and well-dressed, unlike the men from her village. His skin looked fresh, and his appearance spoke of wealth. As soon as he saw Jane, he was captivated by her beauty. He could not take his eyes off her. "Hello, beautiful lady," the man greeted with a charming smile. "You are truly the most beautiful woman I have ever seen." Jane blushed and smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir," she replied politely. Then she looked at him closely and said, "I see you are not from this community. You look different." The man chuckled. "You are right. My name is Leo. I was born here, but I have been living in the United States for many years. I just returned to find a wife from my homeland. But now that I have seen you, I believe I have found my missing rib." Jane laughed at his words, but deep inside she was excited. Could this be the rich man she had been hoping for? Leo then invited Jane to a nearby cool spot where they could sit and talk. Jane hesitated for a moment but then agreed. Something about Leo felt safe and trustworthy. At the cool joint, Leo introduced himself properly. He told Jane about his life abroad, his businesses, and his desire to marry a good woman from his homeland. Then he asked Jane to tell him about herself. Jane did not hesitate. She told Leo everything, how she was an orphan, how she lived alone in her parents' old house, and how she worked on people's farms to survive. She told him about her dreams of a better life and her hope to marry a man who could take care of her. Leo listened carefully, his eyes full of admiration. Then he looked straight into Jane's eyes and said, "Jane, I love you. Do you believe me?" Jane was taken by surprise. Everything was happening so fast, but deep inside, she felt something special for Leo. "I like you too," Jane said softly. Leo smiled and held her hands. "Then let's not waste any time. Please, marry me and complete my life. You are the woman I have been searching for." Jane's heart raced with excitement. This was everything she had been praying for, a rich, kind, and handsome man asking her to be his wife. Without thinking twice, she said, "Yes, Leo, I will marry you." Leo was overjoyed. He held Jane's hands tightly and promised to make her the happiest woman in the world. As soon as Jane left Leo, she rushed straight to Shelly's house to share the good news. She could hardly contain her excitement. "Shelly, you won't believe what just happened," Jane exclaimed as she burst into her friend's house. Shelly looked at Jane and forced a smile. "What is it, my best friend?" she asked, pretending to be excited. Jane sat down and took a deep breath. "I just met a rich man from the United States. His name is Leo, and he has asked me to marry him. Can you believe it? My dreams are finally coming true." Shelly's heart sank. She felt a sharp pain of jealousy, but she quickly masked her emotions with a fake smile. "Wow, that is amazing news, Jane," Shelly said, forcing excitement into her voice. She hugged Jane tightly, pretending to be happy. But inside, her heart burned with envy. Jane was so happy that she didn't notice the darkness in Shelly's eyes. She held her friend's hands and said, "Shelly, I want you to be my chief bridesmaid on my wedding day. You are my best friend, and I can't imagine anyone else standing beside me on my special day." Shelly gasped and placed a hand on her chest. "Oh, Jane, I am so honored. Thank you so much, my best friend. I can't wait for your wedding," she said sweetly. But in her heart, she was thinking of the evil she would do to Jane. Shelly had always been jealous of Jane's beauty, but now, seeing her getting everything she had ever dreamed of, that jealousy turned into hatred. She could not accept that Jane, the poor orphan girl, was about to marry a rich man and live a happy life. No, she would not allow it. As Jane celebrated her good fortune, Shelly sat quietly, smiling on the outside, but plotting something terrible in her heart. As days passed, Shelly's jealousy grew stronger. The thought of Jane, a poor orphan, marrying a wealthy man like Leo, made her heart burn with envy. She could not bear to see her best friend live the life she had always dreamed of. She had to stop Jane's wedding at all costs. One night, under the cover of darkness, Shelly sneaked out of her house and went deep into the forest to visit a feared witch doctor. The old man sat before a fire, his face dark and mysterious. Shelly knelt before him and pleaded for his help. "I want you to stop my friend Jane's wedding," she said desperately. "She cannot marry Leo. I want him for myself." The witch doctor chuckled, his eyes glowing in the dim light. "Are you sure about this, young woman? There is a great risk." "I don't care," Shelly said firmly. "I just want the wedding to be ruined." The witch doctor nodded. "Very well. On the day of her wedding, something terrible will happen. If what I do makes her husband leave her, then the wedding will be destroyed, and he will marry you instead. But if Leo stays by her side despite what happens, you will confess your evil deeds and die instantly." Shelly hesitated for a moment, but her jealousy blinded her. She believed Leo would never stay with Jane after the disaster. She smiled wickedly and said, "I accept." She left the witch doctor's hut with confidence, feeling victorious. She trusted the witch doctor completely, convinced that Jane's wedding would be ruined forever. The wedding day. Finally, the long-awaited day arrived. The village was filled with excitement as guests gathered to witness the grand wedding of Jane and Leo. The venue was beautifully decorated, and everyone was dressed in their finest clothes. Jane looked stunning in her wedding gown, and Leo was as handsome as ever. As the couple walked hand in hand into the ceremony, the guests cheered, and the air was filled with joy. But just as Jane and Leo reached the front, something terrible happened. Suddenly, Jane felt a sharp pain in her stomach. She gasped and clutched her belly. Before she could understand what was happening, blood began to flow from her private part, like a heavy menstrual cycle. The thick, dark blood stained her white wedding gown, spreading fast and emitting a terrible smell. The guests screamed in horror, covering their noses. Women whispered among themselves, and some even stepped back in fear. Leo froze, staring at Jane with wide eyes. Jane, in shock and humiliation, broke down in tears. She had no idea what was happening to her. Many guests whispered that this was a bad omen. Some urged Leo to leave her before it was too late. Shelly stood among the guests, smiling secretly, waiting for Leo to abandon Jane so that her plan could succeed. Leo looked at Jane, his heart pounding. He had never seen anything like this before. But when he saw the pain in Jane's eyes, something deep inside him refused to give up on her. He loved her too much to let this strange event ruin their love. Ignoring the smell and the stares of the crowd, Leo stepped forward and held Jane tightly. "Don't cry, my love," he whispered, wiping her tears. "I will never leave you." Jane sobbed uncontrollably, touched by his words. Despite everything, Leo still chose her. At that moment, something strange happened. Shelly suddenly clutched her chest and let out a loud scream. Her body shook violently, and she fell to the ground. Everyone turned to look at her in shock. Then, to everyone's surprise, Shelly started confessing in a loud voice. "I did it. I went to the witch doctor. I wanted to ruin Jane's wedding so I could have Leo for myself. Please forgive me, Jane. I was blinded by jealousy." Gasps filled the air. Jane, still crying, looked at her best friend in disbelief. But before anyone could react, Shelly let out one final scream and collapsed, lifeless. The crowd stood in shock, unable to believe what had just happened. The witch doctor's words had come true. Because Leo stood by Jane, Shelly had been forced to confess, and it cost her life. Silence filled the venue. Then, slowly, Leo wiped Jane's tears and said, "Let's continue our wedding. Nothing will ruin our day." The guests, still shaken, gathered their courage and agreed. Despite everything, the wedding continued, and Jane and Leo exchanged their vows. Even though Jane was still covered in blood, Leo held her close, showing the world that his love for her was unshakable. A new beginning. After the wedding, Leo wasted no time. He knew Jane had suffered too much in her village, and he wanted to give her a fresh start. Within a few days, he made all the necessary arrangements and flew with Jane to the United States. There, they started a new life together, far away from the pain and betrayal of the past. Jane was forever grateful to God for blessing her with a man like Leo. She realized that true love was not just about wealth, but about someone who would stand by you no matter what. Leo and Jane lived happily ever after, cherishing every moment together. Moral lessons. 1. True love stands the test of time. Leo proved that real love is not about appearances or problems, but about standing by your partner in difficult times. 2. Jealousy leads to destruction. Shelly's envy and wickedness led to her downfall. Instead of being happy for her friend, she allowed jealousy to ruin her. 3. Evil can never win over good. No matter how much people plot against you, if your heart is pure, their evil plans will fail. 4. Be careful who you trust. Jane trusted Shelly blindly, but in the end, she was betrayed by the person she called her best friend. Thank you so much for watching this story. I hope you learned something valuable from it. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment, and most importantly, subscribe to my channel for more amazing stories like this. Stay tuned for more exciting and inspiring folk tales. See you in the next video.